The National Archives in Washington, D.C., houses extensive records documenting the intersection of religious institutions and slavery in America. But some files reveal practices so disturbing, they challenge our understanding of how deeply religious organizations were implicated in the commodification and trafficking of enslaved children. On a morning in October 2024, archivist Dr. Jennifer Martinez opens a package that will lead her to uncover one of the most systematic cases of child trafficking by a religious institution, a Catholic foundling home in New Orleans that between 1845 and 1862 took in over 200 children born to enslaved mothers, then sold those children to white families under the guise of Christian adoption and charitable apprenticeship, profiting from the sale of enslaved children while claiming to provide them with Christian homes and education. The donation comes from a historical society in Louisiana that has been digitizing records from Catholic institutions across the state. The letter explains that while processing materials from the Sisters of Charity Foundling Home, which operated in New Orleans from 1835 to 1870, archivists discovered extensive documentation of a practice they believe constitutes child trafficking, disguised as charitable work. Records showing that the institution systematically took in children of enslaved mothers, then sold those children to white families for substantial fees while claiming the transactions were adoptions or apprenticeships that would benefit the children. Jennifer carefully removes the materials from their archival box. The first item is a photograph, styled like an early 20th century portrait, showing a white nun in full traditional habit, black veil, white wimple, and a long rosary with a cross hanging against her chest, seated indoors and holding a swaddled black infant. The nun's posture is rigid, her shoulders squared, her expression heavy and unsmiling. Her eyes are fixed on the camera, with a gaze that suggests burden rather than tenderness, as if she's been given a responsibility she didn't ask for. The infant sleeps peacefully in her arms, wrapped tightly in simple white cloth, unaware of the tension in the woman holding him. Behind them, the dim interior reveals bare wooden walls and a window, creating an austere institutional atmosphere rather than a nurturing home environment. What strikes Jennifer most powerfully is the contradiction the image represents. A religious figure holding a child, an image that should convey care and protection, but with body language and expression that communicate something more complex and troubling. Jennifer turns the photograph over. Written on the back in faded ink, Sister Mary Catherine with infant at Sisters of Charity Foundling Home, New Orleans, 1855. The foundling home took in children of enslaved mothers, then placed them in Christian homes through paid adoptions and apprenticeships. Between 1845-1862, over 200 enslaved children passed through the institution. Fees ranged from $150 to $300 per child. And below that, in different handwriting, added much later, they called it Christian charity. They claimed they were saving children's souls and providing them with good homes. But they were selling enslaved children for profit while using religious language to hide what was actually child trafficking. The truth was buried in their records for over 150 years. Jennifer reads the inscription 3 times, her stomach tightening. The Sisters of Charity Foundling Home had taken in over 200 children of enslaved mothers over 17 years, then sold those children to white families for fees of $150 to $300 per child, substantial sums equivalent to $5,000, $10,000 today. The institution had used the language of Christian charity and adoption to disguise what was actually systematic child trafficking for profit. Jennifer spends the rest of that day examining the other materials in the package. What she finds is extensive and damning. Financial ledgers from the foundling home, showing payments received for placement of children, correspondence between the nuns and white families, negotiating terms of adoptions and apprenticeships, contracts for child placements that reveal the exploitative terms, and most importantly, testimony from formerly enslaved people collected after the Civil War, describing how their children were taken to the foundling home and sold. From the foundling home's financial records for 1850, Jennifer finds receipts for child placements. January-December 1850, January 15th, placement of Negro infant girl Mary to Mrs. Elizabeth Thornton, Baton Rouge. Fee, $200. March 3, placement of Negro boy child Joseph, age 2, to Mr. and Mrs. Robert Harrison, Natchez. Fee, $250. May 20th, placement of Negro infant boy Samuel to Mrs. Caroline Beaumont, New Orleans. Fee, $175. August 12th, placement of Negro girl child Sarah, age 3, to Mr. and Mrs. William Patterson, Mobile. Fee, $275. November 8th, placement of Negro infant girl Grace to Mrs. Margaret Whitfield, Plantation near New Orleans. Fee, $200. Total receipts from child placements, 1850, 2,150. Jennifer calculates quickly. If the foundling home placed similar numbers of children each year between 1845 and 1862 and charged similar fees, they would have generated approximately $50,000 in revenue from selling enslaved children over those 17 years, equivalent to over $1.5 million today. This was a substantial revenue stream disguised as charitable work. She finds correspondence between the nuns and prospective adoptive families that reveals the transactional nature of these placements. From a letter written in 1852 by Mother Superior Josephine to a woman in Baton Rouge. Dear Mrs. Thornton, we have received your inquiry regarding the adoption of a young Negro child. The Sisters of Charity Foundling Home takes in children born to enslaved mothers who are unable to care for their infants. We provide these children with Christian instruction and care until such time as they can be placed in good Christian homes where they will receive continued religious education and training in useful work. We currently have several young children available for placement. The terms are as follows: a donation to the foundling home of $200 to cover the costs of the child's care to date, and a commitment from the adoptive family to provide the child with Christian instruction, suitable housing, adequate food and clothing, and training in domestic service or other useful occupation. We require that adoptive families be practicing Catholics who will ensure the child receives the sacraments and religious education. The child will be indentured to the family until age 18 for girls or 21 for boys, during which time the child will provide domestic service in exchange for care, lodging, and instruction. If these terms are acceptable, we can arrange for you to visit the foundling home to select a suitable child. In Christ, Mother Superior Josephine. Jennifer reads the letter multiple times, parsing the language. The foundling home framed the transaction as a donation rather than a purchase price, but the effect was the same. Families paid money to obtain children. The requirements seemed benevolent: Christian instruction, suitable care, training in useful occupations. But the reality was that these children would be indentured until adulthood, meaning they would provide unpaid domestic labor for the families who had purchased them. This was slavery by another name, disguised as Christian adoption and charitable apprenticeship. Jennifer contacts Dr. Marcus Thompson, a historian at Tulane University in New Orleans, who specializes in religious institutions' relationship with slavery, particularly the ways that churches and religious organizations profited from slavery while claiming moral authority. Marcus has spent decades researching how Catholic institutions in Louisiana owned enslaved people, operated plantations, and participated in the slave economy. Marcus calls her back within an hour. The Sisters of Charity Foundling Home. I've found references to it in my research, but I never had access to their internal records. If you found documentation showing they systematically sold enslaved children while claiming to provide charitable placements, this could be one of the most documented cases of religiously sanctioned child trafficking in American history. Send me everything. Jennifer scans all the materials and emails them to Marcus. They arrange to meet at the Louisiana State Archives in Baton Rouge, where Marcus has already requested records from the Sisters of Charity, Catholic diocesan records from the 1840s, 1860s, and any available documentation about foundling homes and child placement practices in antebellum Louisiana. Over the following days, Jennifer and Marcus piece together the complete story of how the Sisters of Charity Foundling Home operated and how it used the language of Christian charity to disguise systematic child trafficking. They find that the Foundling Home was established in 1835 by an order of Catholic nuns with the stated mission of providing care for abandoned children and orphans. Initially, the home served primarily white children from families unable to care for them. But by the early 1840s, the Foundling Home had begun accepting children of enslaved mothers. From correspondence and records, Jennifer and Marcus discover how this practice developed. Enslaved women who became pregnant, often through rape by slaveholders or overseers, sometimes gave birth to children whom their enslavers did not want to keep. Light-skinned children might reveal sexual relationships between white men and enslaved women. Children born to enslaved women who worked as domestic servants might be considered inconvenient or distracting. The Foundling Home offered a solution. Enslaved mothers or their enslavers could bring infants to the institution, which would care for the children and eventually place them in Christian homes. For enslaved mothers, this might seem like an opportunity to give their children better lives. For enslavers, it was a way to dispose of unwanted children while appearing charitable. But the Foundling Home's records reveal that these children were not treated the same as white orphans. While white orphans were placed in families at no cost or for minimal fees, children of enslaved mothers were sold for substantial sums under the guise of adoption fees and placement donations. From diocesan correspondence, Jennifer and Marcus find a letter from 1848 showing that the Bishop of New Orleans was aware of and approved this practice. Mother Superior Josephine has inquired whether the Foundling Home may accept children born to enslaved mothers, and whether fees may be charged for placing such children in Christian homes. I have considered this matter carefully and concluded that this practice serves several charitable purposes. It provides care for children who might otherwise be abandoned or mistreated. It places these children in homes where they will receive Christian instruction, and the fees charged help fund the Foundling Home's operations. As these children are born into the state of slavery and would otherwise remain enslaved, their placement in homes where they will serve Christian families while receiving religious education is consistent with the Church's teachings. The practice may continue with the understanding that all placements must be to practicing Catholic families committed to providing Christian instruction. The bishop's approval reveals the theological and moral gymnastics required to justify the practice, framing the sale of enslaved children as charity, because the children would receive religious instruction while providing unpaid labor to the families who purchased them. Jennifer and Marcus examine the contracts that families signed when they obtained children from the foundling home. These contracts, presented as adoption agreements or apprenticeship indentures, reveal the exploitative terms. From a typical contract, dated 1853, indenture agreement between the Sisters of Charity Foundling Home and Mr. and Mrs. Robert Harrison of Natchez, Mississippi. The Sisters of Charity Foundling Home hereby places in the care of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Harrison a Negro girl child named Sarah, age approximately 4 years, born to an enslaved mother and surrendered to the foundling home's care. Terms of placement. 1. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison make a donation of $250 to the foundling home to defray costs of Sarah's care to date. 2. Sarah is indentured to Mr. and Mrs. Harrison until she reaches age 18, at which time she may be released from indenture at the discretion of Mr. and Mrs. Harrison. 3. During her indenture, Sarah will provide domestic service including but not limited to cooking, cleaning, childcare, and any other household duties as required. 4. Mr. 2. Matt and Mrs. Harrison agree to provide Sarah with suitable food, clothing, and lodging, and to ensure she receives Catholic religious instruction, including attendance at Mass and reception of the sacraments. 5. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison agree not to inflict cruel or unusual punishment upon Sarah. 6. Upon completion of her indenture at age 18, Mr. and Mrs. Harrison may, at their discretion, continue to employ Sarah for wages or release her to seek other employment. Signed, Mother Superior Josephine, Sisters of Charity Foundling Home, Mr. Robert Harrison, and Mrs. Carolyn Harrison. Jennifer and Marcus analyzed this contract carefully. The child, Sarah, would provide unpaid domestic labor from age 4 until age 18, 14 years of unpaid work. At age 18, her employers could decide whether to continue employing her for wages or release her. There was no guarantee of wages or freedom even after completing the indenture. This was slavery disguised as apprenticeship, with a veneer of religious charity. The most disturbing materials Jennifer and Marcus examine are testimonies from formerly enslaved people, collected by the Freedmen's Bureau after the Civil War. These testimonies describe the experiences of mothers whose children were taken to the foundling home and sold. From testimony given in New Orleans in 1866 by a woman named Ruth. "My name is Ruth. I was enslaved on a plantation outside New Orleans. In 1852, when I was approximately 20 years old, I gave birth to a daughter. The child's father was the plantation owner's son, who had forced himself on me repeatedly. The child was light-skinned, and the plantation owner's wife was upset by the child's presence. The child was evidence of her son's behavior. When my daughter was 3 months old, the plantation owner told me the child was being taken to a Catholic foundling home in New Orleans, where she would be cared for and eventually placed in a good Christian home. He said this was for my daughter's benefit, that she would have opportunities she wouldn't have on the plantation. I didn't want to give up my child, but I had no choice. I was enslaved, and my daughter was the property of the plantation owner. He could do whatever he wanted with her. I hoped that maybe the foundling home would give her a better life than I could provide. I never saw my daughter again. After emancipation, I tried to find out what happened to her. I went to the Sisters of Charity Foundling Home in New Orleans and asked about children who had been brought there in 1852. The nuns told me they had no records of my daughter, that they couldn't help me, that I should accept that my child had been placed in a good home and was better off than she would have been with me. But I later learned from other formerly enslaved people that the foundling home had sold children to white families, that they charged money for these placements, and that the children worked as servants for the families who took them. I realized my daughter had been sold, that the plantation owner had gotten rid of an inconvenient child, and the foundling home had profited from selling her. I don't know where my daughter is now. I don't know if she's alive or dead, if she was treated well or cruelly, if she knows she had a mother who loved her. The Sisters of Charity took my child and sold her, and they called it Christian charity. Jennifer and Marcus find dozens of similar testimonies, mothers describing how their children were taken to the foundling home, with promises that the children would be cared for and placed in good homes, only to discover after emancipation that their children had been sold and that the foundling home profited from these sales. They also find testimony from adults who had been placed through the foundling home as children. From testimony given in 1867 by a woman named Grace. My name is Grace. I was born enslaved in approximately 1848. When I was an infant, I was taken to the Sisters of Charity Foundling Home in New Orleans. I don't know why I was brought there or what happened to my mother. I have no memory of her. I was raised at the foundling home until I was approximately 2 years old. Then, I was placed with a white family in New Orleans named the Beaumonts. The nuns told Mrs. Beaumont that I had been orphaned and that she was providing me with a Christian home by adopting me. But this wasn't adoption as I understand it now. Mrs. Beaumont paid money to the foundling home to obtain me. I later learned she paid $200, and I wasn't treated as her child. I was her servant. From age 2 until emancipation in 1865, I worked in the Beaumont household. As a small child, I did light chores, picking up, helping with laundry, running errands. As I got older, my duties expanded. I cooked, cleaned, cared for the Beaumont's children, did all the heavy housework. I worked from dawn until late night. I received no wages, only food, and a place to sleep in a small room off the kitchen. I was not allowed to attend school. Mrs. Beaumont said enslaved children didn't need education. I was taken to Mass on Sundays. The foundling home required that I receive Catholic instruction, but otherwise I had no life outside of work. Mrs. Beaumont was not kind. She beat me regularly for small infractions or mistakes. She called me lazy and stupid. She told me I should be grateful that she had given me a home, and that without her Christian charity, I would have been abandoned. When emancipation came in 1865, Mrs. Beaumont told me I could stay and work for wages of $2 per month, or I could leave. I left. I was 17 years old. I had worked for the Beaumonts for 15 years, without wages. Mrs. Beaumont had paid $200 to obtain me from the foundling home, and in return, she had received 15 years of unpaid labor from me, labor worth thousands of dollars. I file this testimony to document that the Sisters of Charity Foundling Home was not providing charity. They were selling enslaved children to white families who wanted servants. They used religious language, Christian adoption, charitable placement, providing orphans with homes, to disguise what was actually child trafficking for profit. The foundling home told families like the Beaumonts that they were doing charitable work by taking in these children. But the families weren't providing charity. They were purchasing servants. And the foundling home profited from these sales while claiming to do God's work. Jennifer and Marcus spend weeks researching what happened to the Sisters of Charity Foundling Home after the Civil War. They find that when slavery was abolished in 1865, the foundling home's lucrative practice of selling enslaved children to white families ended. The institution continued to operate as an orphanage for several more years, but without the income from child placements, it struggled financially. The foundling home closed in 1870. Records show that the building was sold, and the remaining children in care were transferred to other institutions. There was no public acknowledgement of the foundling home's practice of selling enslaved children, no accountability for the trafficking that had occurred, no effort to locate and compensate the children who had been sold or their families. The Catholic Church's institutional response to inquiries about the foundling home was defensive. From diocesan records in the 1870s, Jennifer and Marcus find correspondence showing that when questions were raised about the foundling home's practices, church officials claimed that child placements had been legitimate adoptions and apprenticeships that benefited the children by providing them with Christian homes. Officials denied that the fees charged constituted sale of children, arguing instead that they were donations to support the foundling home's charitable work. But the records Jennifer and Marcus have examined make these denials impossible to sustain. The financial ledgers document substantial revenue from child placements. The contracts reveal exploitative terms that amounted to unpaid servitude. The testimony from mothers and from the children themselves describes a system of trafficking disguised as charity. Jennifer and Marcus calculate that between 1845 and 1862, the Sisters of Charity Foundling Home took in and sold at least 200 children of enslaved mothers, generating approximately $50,000 in revenue. Each of these children provided years of unpaid labor to the families who purchased them. Conservative estimates suggest these 200 children collectively provided over 2,000 years of unpaid domestic labor, representing millions of dollars in economic value, extracted from children who were told they were receiving Christian charity. Over the following months, Jennifer and Marcus worked to create an exhibition documenting this case of religiously sanctioned child trafficking. They work with genealogists to try to trace some of the children who were sold through the foundling home, though this proves difficult given the limited records and the passage of time. They do locate a few descendants who have family stories about ancestors who were placed through orphanages or foundling homes as children, and who later learned they had been sold. 17 months after Jennifer first opened that package, the National Archives opens the exhibition, The Blessed Babies: How a Catholic Foundling Home Trafficked Enslaved Children Under the Guise of Christian Charity. The exhibition occupies a major gallery designed to honor the victims, the mothers who lost their children and the children who were sold, while unflinchingly documenting how a religious institution systematically profited from child trafficking. The centerpiece is the photograph of Sister Mary Catherine holding the infant, an image that initially seems to show religious care, but in the context of the institution's actual practices, reveals the troubling reality beneath the charitable facade. A detailed explanation accompanies the image. This photograph from 1855 shows a nun at the Sisters of Charity Foundling Home in New Orleans, holding an infant born to an enslaved mother. Between 1845 and 1862, this Catholic institution took in over 200 children of enslaved mothers, then sold those children to white families for fees of $150 to $300 per child, approximately $5,000 and $10,000 in today's currency. The institution called this practice Christian adoption and charitable placement, but records reveal it was systematic child trafficking disguised as religious charity. The children worked as unpaid servants for the families who purchased them. The exhibition tells the complete story through the foundling home's own records, correspondence, contracts, testimony from mothers and children, and historical analysis. It doesn't minimize the Catholic Church's role, displaying diocesan approval of the practice and church officials' later defensive responses when questioned about it. One section displays the financial records, showing the scale of revenue generated from child sales, ledgers documenting 200-plus placements over 17 years, and approximately $50,000 in fees collected. The exhibition calculates the economic value of the unpaid labor these children provided, showing that the families who purchased them received thousands of dollars worth of domestic service, while paying only a one-time fee. Another section examines the contracts and placement agreements, analyzing the language used to disguise trafficking as charity. The exhibition shows how terms like adoption, Christian placement, charitable indenture, and apprenticeship obscured the reality that children were being sold and would provide unpaid labor for years. The exhibition includes extensive testimony from mothers like Ruth, who lost their children to the foundling home, and from adults like Grace, who were sold through the system as children. Their voices document the human cost of the practice, mothers' grief at losing children, children's experiences of exploitation while being told they were receiving charity. A section on institutional accountability examines how the foundling home closed in 1870 without ever acknowledging its trafficking practices, how the Catholic Church defended the institution's actions, and how no compensation was ever provided to the victims. The exhibition includes information about recent efforts by some Catholic institutions to acknowledge historical complicity with slavery and child trafficking, while noting that comprehensive acknowledgement and restitution have not occurred. The exhibition also provides broader context about other religious institutions that engaged in similar practices, Protestant orphanages and foundling homes that also sold or indentured children of enslaved mothers, showing that this was a widespread practice across denominations. A video plays continuously featuring historians discussing how religious institutions used charitable language to disguise profit-making activities, how the practice of selling enslaved children through orphanages and foundling homes was more common than generally recognized, and why institutional accountability for these practices remains important today. On opening day, Jennifer stands in the gallery watching visitors engage with the exhibition. She sees people study the photograph of Sister Mary Catherine with the infant, understanding how the image's apparent depiction of religious care actually represents an institution that profited from selling children. Marcus stands beside her, looking at the image. "That infant in the photograph," he says quietly, "was probably sold within months or a year of this photograph being taken. Some family paid $200 or more to obtain that child, and the child grew up working as their servant, while being told this arrangement was Christian charity. That's the reality beneath this image. A child being held by someone from an institution that would sell him for profit while claiming to provide salvation." A young black woman approaches them, after spending a long time reading the testimonies. My great-great-grandmother was born enslaved in Louisiana around 1850, she says, emotion in her voice. Family stories always said she was separated from her mother as a baby and raised in a white household where she worked as a servant. We never knew the details of how that happened. Reading these testimonies and records, understanding that there were institutions that systematically took children from enslaved mothers and sold them while calling it adoption. It makes me wonder if my ancestor was one of these children. The foundling home's records are incomplete, so I'll probably never know for certain. But knowing this happened, understanding the system that stole children and profited from trafficking them, that's important. An elderly white woman stops to read the financial records for a long time. They made $50,000 selling over 200 children, she says, her voice shaking. That's equivalent to over $1.5 million today. They ran a profitable child trafficking operation for 17 years and called it Christian charity. The hypocrisy is staggering. These were nuns, people supposedly dedicated to serving God and helping the vulnerable, and they were selling babies. A middle-aged man who identifies himself as Catholic approaches Jennifer and Marcus. "I'm Catholic, and I love my faith," he says. "But the church has to acknowledge this history fully and honestly. We can't claim moral authority on issues of human dignity and justice if we don't reckon with how Catholic institutions participated in slavery and child trafficking. The Sisters of Charity Foundling Home sold enslaved children while claiming to provide Christian homes. The bishop approved this practice. The church defended it after the war. That history deserves acknowledgement, apology, and some form of restitution to descendants of the victims." Throughout the day, visitors engage deeply with the exhibition, understanding that the foundling home's practice represents a specific form of exploitation, using the language and structures of religious charity to disguise systematic child trafficking for profit, selling children while claiming to save their souls, profiting from human suffering while claiming moral authority. As the museum prepares to close that evening, Jennifer walks through the gallery one more time. She stops in front of the photograph, looking at Sister Mary Catherine's burdened expression, at the sleeping infant unaware of what awaited him. She thinks about the 200-plus children who passed through the Sisters of Charity Foundling Home between 1845-1862, children taken from enslaved mothers with promises of better lives, children sold to white families for $150, $300 each, children who grew up providing unpaid domestic labor while being told they were receiving Christian charity. She thinks about the mothers like Ruth, who lost their children to the foundling home and spent years after emancipation searching for them, often never learning what happened to them or whether they were alive or dead. And she thinks about the adults like Grace, who survived being sold through this system, who worked for years without wages, who were beaten and exploited while being told to be grateful for Christian charity, and who finally, after emancipation, understood that what had been done to them was trafficking disguised as adoption. The photograph waited 169 years to reveal the full truth about the institution it represents. The image that seemed to show religious care for a vulnerable child actually documents an institution that systematically trafficked enslaved children for profit while using the language of Christian charity to disguise exploitation. Now the photograph and exhibition have fulfilled a purpose that honors the victims, the story of the Sisters of Charity Foundling. Home's trafficking practices has been told completely. The evidence from the institution's own records has been displayed. The testimony from mothers and children has been preserved and honored. And future generations can understand how religious institutions used charitable language to disguise profit-making activities that destroyed families and exploited vulnerable children. As visitors file past the image one last time, many stopping to look at the infant and think about what became of him, Jennifer reflects on all the other cases of religiously sanctioned exploitation that deserve to be documented, all the other victims whose stories should be told, all the other institutions that used religious authority to hide practices that violated the principles they claimed to uphold. The Sisters of Charity Foundling Home, operated 1835-1870 in New Orleans, took in 200-plus children of enslaved mothers between 1845 to 1862, sold those children to white families for fees of $150 to $300, each generating approximately $50,000 in revenue, called the practice Christian adoption and charitable placement, while it was actually systematic child trafficking, closed in 1870 without acknowledging its trafficking practices, never faced accountability or provided compensation to victims. The truth has been documented. The victims have been honored. And Jennifer is grateful to have played a part in ensuring that this case of religiously sanctioned child trafficking is no longer hidden, that the children who were sold and the mothers who lost them are remembered, and that the institution's use of Christian charity to disguise exploitation has been exposed for what it truly was.